With Vice President Kamala Harris's announcement of her running mate only days away, I should probably be placing odds on who will get the nod. But my thoughts dwell on three extraordinarily gifted politicians who almost certainly won't. They belie all the complaints until recently about the barren Democratic Party bench, constituting a whole gleaming bleachers section of their own. They expose the truth about something else when you live in a country still staggering imperfectly down the path to full equality, a country of lingering biases. A country attached to the tested ways of the good old days. You sacrifice talent. You squander resources. You shrink the parameters of possibility. You allow yourself the bounty of Josh Shapiro, Mark Kelly, Andy Beshear, and Tim Walz, all of whom reportedly reached the finals of consideration to join Harris on the Democratic ticket. You deny yourself the splendor of Gretchen Whitmer, Gina Raimondo, and Pete Buttigieg, all of whom have been deemed long shots or non-starters for reasons apart from their political talents. Whitmer, the second-term Michigan governor, publicly withdrew herself from consideration toward the start, but she surely sensed what would quickly become the conventional wisdom. Harris, potentially the first woman president, isn't likely to test whether the country might go for a double milestone and vote for a ticket of two women. Maybe that would electrify the race to her advantage. Maybe it would do the opposite. With the stakes as high as they are in this election, risks that big are arguably unaffordable. So Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary and former governor of Rhode Island, was also automatically downgraded. She appeared on some early lists of Harris's strongest options, but not near the top. Gender didn't factor into the ranking of Buttigieg, the Transportation Secretary, below the previously mentioned men. Sexual orientation did. Is America ready to have both a black woman as president and a gay man as her no? To a few of the seasoned and sensible political analysts, I know believe that 2024 is the year to find out. I don't disagree. Keeping Trump from another for years in the White House matters more than anything else. Harris must make her decision entirely or almost entirely on tactical grounds. She must take the country as it is, not as it will someday ideally be. And while centuries of Republican and Democratic tickets comprising to white, presumably straight men should leave not just ample room, but also a hunger for a Harris Whitmer, Harris Raimondo, or Harris Buttigieg ticket, I wouldn't stake the survival of our democracy on it. I'm a realist. But I'm a sad realist at that. I've never met or interviewed Whitmer, 52, but as someone who lived and worked as a journalist in Michigan for 5 years, I've followed her more closely than I have other governors. She has proved unusually deft at appealing to both the progressive and moderate wings of the Democratic Party, which, during her time as governor, gained control of both chambers of the state legislature. Although the state is decidedly purple, she won re-election in 2022 by more than 10 percentage points. She did that in part by recognizing the political power of the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade and talking about the ruling's impact as effectively as any politician in the country. Her "Fix the Damn Roads" mantra during her first campaign for governor in 2018 addressed more than potholes. It recognized the need to identify problems and goals that transcend partisan divisions. This was something that kind of took the politics out of the political conversation and said, "Let's just be practical," she told my Times Opinion colleague Ezra Klein during a recent interview for his podcast. It also said something about her common sense and capacity for humility. Fixing the damn roads isn't the best calling card for panels in Aspen and Davos, but it's a smart route to triumph on election day. I've spent many hours over many years and over no shortage of Italian food speaking with Raimondo, 53. In an era of angry populism and reflexive grievance, she stands out for trying to find and articulate the common interests of corporate America and workers without college degrees. Like Whitmer, she's consensus-minded and has an emphatically practical streak. When I interviewed her in early 2019, she mentioned a detractor's dig that she was one of those spineless centrists. And I was like, "Excuse me." She said, "It takes a lot of spine to be a centrist in America today. You get whacked from the left and whacked from the right. That's my life. I get whacked." Talk to Raimondo about almost any subject that she's supposed to be informed about, and you'll find that she's a trove of information and insights. Talk to Washington insiders about President Biden's cabinet, and they'll tell you what a standout she is. Maybe that just means she's fluent in the language of those insiders. But maybe that speaks to her sense of purpose, her grit, and her discipline. I also know Buttigieg, 42, well, having first profiled him back in 2016. He doesn't get the kind of rave reviews for his work in the cabinet that Raimondo does, but his journey there remains hugely impressive. In 2020, when he was still in his 30s and his main political credential was to terms as mayor of a Midwestern city with only about 100,000 people, he won the most delegates in the Iowa caucuses, placed a close second in the New Hampshire primary, and all in all outperformed many seasoned members of Congress. How? With almost peerless communication skills. He went on Fox News last weekend to scold Trump on broken promises and Republicans on the selective use of crime statistics. It went viral. He went on Bill Maher's show about a week before that and explained that some Silicon Valley billionaires like Trump because they like money. It went viral. But a gig is a jukebox of perfectly toned, perfectly shaped, and perfectly crisp rebuttals and arguments. Punch in your selected topic and let the music play. And who knows? Maybe he'll be Harris's surprise pick. Maybe Raimondo or even Whitmer, coaxed into the race, will be chosen. But probably not. And before they're passed over, I want to give them their due. In The New Yorker, Zach Helfand assembled a gallery of ear wounds through time, including Vincent van Gogh's. At least he demonstrated proper ear bandaging technique. Wrapping an ear, a bendy and floppy thing, is like putting a sweater on a fish. You need another structure as a splint. Van Gogh used his head. In his self-portrait, he wears his gauze like a babushka. Of course, that smushes the hair, which is presumably why Trump opted for a smaller, more awkward covering, like a panty liner, over just the ear, which looks as if someone forgot to snip off his sales tag. Thanks to Kurt Milton of Seattle and Mary Beth Coonan of St. Paul, Min, among others, for nominating this. Also in The New Yorker, Rebecca Mead remarked on people's surprise when they learned that the Italian painter Isabella Ducret, who is only now having her first international solo show, is 93. We tend to assign to the elderly, and especially to elderly women, the vague, and often diminishing, attribute of wisdom, thereby suggesting that their own creative, intellectual, or erotic evolution has come to an end, and that their sole remaining role is to give advice to others. Ducret's work and life offer an alternative possibility that an individual might remain wide-eyed and open to experience, in an enduring state of naivete, and with a capacity to be joyfully surprised until the very end. Tut Stap McKiernan, Castleton, VA. In the San Francisco Chronicle, Killian captured the intrusion of security worries on the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, and on pretty much any public event like it, helicopters passed overhead. Atop the recognizable monuments and stately buildings, the black shadows of snipers were the gargoyles of our time. All Meggery, San Francisco, in a letter to the editor of the Washington Post, Larry McClemens of Annandale, VA, took issue with Oklahoma's new edict that the Bible be taught in every classroom, perhaps in a show of fairness. These state officials could mandate the teaching of algebra in churches. Arthur Rothstein, San Francisco, also in the Washington Post, Rusty Foster reported on the insects keeping him company as he hiked the Appalachian Trail. I became a moving ecosystem, with entire generations of black flies meeting, falling in love, mating, raising their young, and dying within a 3-inch radius of my eyeballs, which apparently weep the sweetest nectar imaginable, judging by how many of them gave their lives to taste it just once. Richard Gautran, Torrance, Califf, and Miggs Halpern, Asheville, N.C. Among others in the Times, Priyanka Mehta nailed the bedlam of mediocrity that is television today. The viewing experience, which used to be relatively straightforward and, dare I say, fun, now feels as overwhelming and unpleasant as walking into a dimly lit, warehouse-sized dollar store in search of one decent spatula. Stephen Roch, Watertown, Mass., and Doug Hjelmstad, Gothenburg, Neb, among others also in the Times. Maureen Dowd got personal. As a cat-loving, cosmopolitan type myself, I do not want Trump and Vance making intimate decisions for American women or judging us or disparaging us for our lives, all 9 of them. Judy Morris, Lansdale, Pa, and Terry Borage, Arlington, VA. Among others in Talking Points memo, Josh Marshall drew attention to performance-minded Republicans' advantage in presidential elections. Democrats, really focused on governance, often get hung up on the libretto of a campaign when what really drives it forward is the score. Jane Abbott, Hubbardston, Mass. And in The Atlantic, Charles Sykes analyzed Democrats' embrace of the vice president as their de facto nominee. Harris is far from their first choice, but when your kitchen is in flames, you reach for whatever extinguisher is at hand. You can worry later about washing the dishes or whether you need a new garbage disposal. Put the fire out now. Glenn Huberman, Miami, and Marjorie Ivy, St. Louis, among others, to nominate favorite bits of recent writing from the Times or other publications to be mentioned in For the Love of Sentences. Please email me here and include your name and place of residence. While I follow politics in real time, I often catch up to culture late. So I just got around to reading Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, Gabrielle Evans' rapturously praised novel No. 76 on the Times' recent list of the best 100 books of this century about the turbulent friendship of two brilliant video game makers. It came out in 2022. You may be thinking, video games? I feel you. Not my world, either. But I love Zevon's opus, whose terminology and terrain prove to be entirely accessible and richly metaphoric. It's about kindness and cruelty, pride and petulance, big accidents and medium-sized misunderstandings, and, overarching all that, our yearning to create worlds more ordered, controllable, and forgiving than our messy reality. Which won't be denied. You know those people who say, I forgot to eat today, and are telling the truth? I basically consider them aliens. Emma Spector would too. She has written a book, More, Please, that describes binge eating as well as anything on the subject that I've read. It also asks important questions about our baffling and sometimes tortured relationships with our own bodies. Published early last month, it got starred reviews in both Kirkus and Publishers Weekly after I mentioned in last week's newsletter that I'd twice slammed the same kitchen door on one of my fingers. Many of you wrote to suggest, kindly, that the door be removed. I should have been clearer. It separates the kitchen not from another interior room, but from the garage. It's necessary. It's staying. And I'm just going to have to pay more attention to my graceless movements. Fingers, crossed. The dog on the left is Marlin, my sister's flat-coated retriever. That's my Regan on the right. I took the picture just 10 days ago, and you could justly wonder why. Neither dog is in some eye-catching pose. Neither's beauty really comes through. But the fact that Marlin was on that bed, that he jumped up there to join his longtime playmate, was in itself remarkable. He had little strength. He was barely eating. He'd be dead cancer 5 days later. Nothing mattered more to Marlin than being as close as possible to the objects of his love. Well, maybe food mattered more, and Marlin's appetites were eclectic. I remember looking down one evening 4 or 5 years ago to find him beside me on the couch, sneakily lowering his tongue into my martini. I figured he'd recoil at the taste and wish he'd been more discerning. He took a second slurp. I also remember his bafflement whenever he was consigned to the back seat of the car. In what sane world should he be kept at such a distance from the humans up front? Like Kristen Wiig in Bridesmaids, he'd keep popping up uninvited in first class. Surely there was room for all 65 pounds of him in someone's lap. It was my good fortune to be able to visit my sister and spend a few days with Marlin while he was still hanging in there. Mostly, he slept. He wheezed when he breathed. He didn't trail my sister, her husband, and me from room to room, the way he always had in the past. He seldom stirred when one of us walked by. But when I sat down on the floor next to him and told him that he was the sweetest, best boy in all the world, his tail wagged. Not much. Not for long. But there was no mistaking it.